Quick survey. How many of you are raising a teenager? Please, I need friends. Okay, great. How many of you are raising a teenage daughter? Oh my God. Okay, so I've got to develop a relationship with you first, so let's find the common ground here. My daughter comes home with her date, dare I say. So, I'm doing the dad thing, sizing the guy up, and he's kind of tatted out, you know what I mean by that? He's got some piercings, he's got some leather, he's got something on his mind. So, I'm kind of looking at this guy and I'm trying to figure out how do I kind of explain this to his daughter. So, I kind of pull her aside and I go, sweetheart, I'm not sure that I'm struggling for the right word, right? I'm just not sure that he's nice. I'm not sure that he's a nice guy. And she goes, oh, Daddy, don't worry. If he weren't nice, why would he be doing 500 hours of community service? That's not true. I have a 14-year-old daughter who is a bit of a geek. She is a fellow soul with all of us. But as we look at these things, it's about having an identity. I come to you from the great land abroad that is Panama City, Florida. I say that because I took the liberty of watching your local news last night, and I got some of it from Mobile, right? Was that Channel 15? And then there's Channel 3, which is Pensacola. So I learned very quickly what's 8 minutes under the tunnel for great car prices. You guys have a lot of car commercials here. So that's good for you. But what we haven't really done as we traveled around in building this $35 million center is we kind of exposed ourselves to the best ideas that were out there as far as a region. What is a region? What makes a region? What identity did that particular region choose and why? It started a long time ago with Thomas More. I know a lot of you probably know this already. But we want our kids, and I love this, I love ITEN Wired because it talks about talent. We've got to not attract talent. First we have to grow that talent. Then we have to retain that talent. Then we attract that talent. Because ultimately for our daughters and our sons, we want to provide the best possible living that there is out there. And there's a word for that. But if you look at the origin of the word, it means it actually doesn't exist. Take a look at what Thomas More was trying to tell Henry VIII, which, by the way, wasn't a really good economic development plan for Thomas More, if you remember what happened to him. Literally lost his head. But it means a place that doesn't exist. So we're all struggling across the United States. I went out to a venture capital conference in California. It was at Laguna Beach. It's a beautiful place. And I met some very interesting people there. And David Brin is one of those people. He's a New York Times bestselling sci-fi author. And he showed me this graphic novel that he had helped create. And it talks about the tinkerers. And the tinkerers is really kind of the culture in the United States. And we're all quite aware of that. We do so very much with so very little. And the story starts out in a town where a bridge fails. The bridge is the only access to and from the town. And unfortunately, no one in the town knows how to fix the bridge. So what David is proposing in the literature is called a custom event. There's something, a disaster that's happened, and it brings a bunch of people together around that particular disaster. So this kid goes, well, what happened? How come nobody here in the town can fix this bridge except me? And he was the odd kid that was the welder, and no one had remembered how to weld, and they had all gone on to different careers. So David starts this little story, and he says, well, we were this nation built on the freedom to innovate, from World War II to our origins, to there's some shots of IT, and then the blame game starts. So when we look at policy, and we look at educational rates, and we look at completion, and we look at job performance, something happens. I really liked the Simpsons. Years ago, I remember this episode where they walked in, and Homer walks up to this table, and the kids were being handed out labels: gifted, challenged. This one over here is, you're this other type. So up at the top of the giant banner said, "Share the blame." So that was the open house night to school. So typically, the blame starts with education. The schools aren't producing enough talent. Well, it's a leadership issue. We don't have the leaders. Well, it's the selfishness of business. No, it's not. It's government. Government is wasteful. Oh, it's not that. It's just a function of culture. It's part of democracy. And some people feel, you know what, the United States is just a function of history. We've only been around a couple hundred years. It's just your time. So when we look at economic development and we look at regional development, this is typically a model that we see. We see this attraction model. I think the governor just put $250 million into a strategy to attract and build business in Florida. When you go to Alabama, you go to Tennessee, you go to these other states, and you can see much more aggressive approaches to economic development, which we don't have to worry because we have what? Oh, I heard it. I heard the word. We don't need economic development. We have beaches. So when you look at that, that kind of changes the topology a bit different. So all of these counties and these EDA organizations are competing for a limited number of relocations versus an entrepreneurial model where you're looking at creating and growing that talent and 3 million jobs a year. Now, all of this is happening for all of us in business and government and education and industry within this churn of an industrial age economy, a knowledge-based economy, and something that we're calling CME, or a creative molecular economy. It's where the ground is literally moving beneath your feet. I saw this recently, and it tries to describe the innovation ecosystem in Silicon Valley. Let me see if I can get this thing to work here. I was working earlier, that figures, right? Okay, so down here is this pool. Whoops. Down here in the lower left is a pool, and that's the innovation pool where you look at university startups and research, entrepreneurs, accelerators, corporate labs. This is the cauldron of ideas. So the whole system in Silicon Valley is to pull from that pool and help them rise up that ladder, up that landscape. It starts with angels and mentors, $20,000 each for startup ideas. Only 10% of those reach any capital formation. For venture capitalists, then they connect to their networks, keep going up the corporate ladder and adoption, and eventually they see success as an IPO, and all of that talent flows back in. But if you take a look at that, that's really a natural ecosystem. That is their business model. That is pretty much their culture. So if we're going to take advantage of these new ideas that are constantly out there in this churning economy, there's some things we need to think about that become a function of it. I'm going to keep going back to this because I'm so happy I heard it again and again in the breakout sessions. This isn't a function of policy as much as it is a function of culture. We have to establish that culture that's going to be conducive to the 14-year-old people that want to stay in our community and don't go to some other communities that I'm going to show you who are aggressively pursuing your kids. And one of those, I just got back from St. Louis. Anybody here from St. Louis? I know some of the radio guys were. Nobody? All right. St. Louis has a 40-year strategy and something they call the Cortex Innovation Community. It is a $2 billion 200-acre investment for a startup community. They're building apartments for the millennials. Remember that the millennial rite of passage is no longer a car. It's no longer a vehicle. What is the millennial rite of passage? Yeah, it's a phone. It's a phone. They carry the world around in their pocket. They're connected in ways that's difficult for others to understand and appreciate. But when you go into this ecosystem, you'll see what St. Louis has as a broad economic development strategy is connecting generators, advanced technology centers. They've attracted the Cambridge Innovation Center. They've created something called Venture Cafe. And it's one of those great melting pots where they have multiple businesses under one roof. It's the scale of this thing that is phenomenal. And they're driving rail to it. They also have, after the millennials start to pair up and have families, and some of them have children, they have suburban areas planned out. And when they retire, they have a community plan for those folks that retire to give back constantly into that innovation ecosystem from cradle to grave. They want you to live, work, and play where? St. Louis, Missouri. So when you travel around, you see more and more of these things, but I want to pull up a quick video clip to show you and let them kind of give their thoughts on it.
Going forward, how are we going to work together? What is the future of enterprise, right? These are some of the questions that I think are on a lot of people's minds. We really see innovation as a communal activity. CIC is a physical environment which acts as a concentrator, where you're working on your own projects, but you're also around other people who are innovating, who are likely to be able to open doors for you that you couldn't see opened any other way.
The clients that are here serve as a tremendous wealth of information.
The nice thing about it here is everybody knows something you don't know.
Rather than being in our own office with just 2 to 5 people on a daily basis, we get to be in a space with lots of other companies solving similar challenges.
We know that about $7 billion of venture capital is now headquartered in our buildings just in Cambridge. And what's interesting is what goes into achieving those kinds of outputs.
There's a natural spot to the central location.
You can scale your business on demand.
There's a lot of collaboration.
Really high energy people building startups, investors, and larger companies wanting to be in the mix with them.
Thank you. So what are they selling? They're not selling space? No, you're invited. You're invited, come join us. What are they selling? Starts with a C.
Collaboration.
Community, cooperation, one big word.
Culture.
Thank you. They are selling culture. Come be a part of our culture. Live, work, play. So that's what we're looking at across the United States. When you see this thing, it's several stories high. Some companies, they have single offices. They have offices for as many as 30, 40 people. There you see a young woman. It's kind of difficult on the left. She's got some material. I went in and talked to her. She imported some seeds from South America. She's working on a new fabric. So she's got all kinds of help around her. You can reserve any of these spaces on touch screens throughout their facilities. Again, more infrastructure, collaborative meeting places. There's Venture Cafe. On the far right, there's a ping pong table. I had the experience one time flying. I sat next to someone who worked with Werner von Braun. I see some heads nodding out there. When Werner came over, he was the developer largely of the V2 rocket and was largely responsible for much of what we call NASA. But when he came over, the guy said, you know, the first thing he has to do is get a big warehouse. He said, I want blackboards all around. I want chalkboards everywhere. And in between every chalkboard, I want a pinball machine. Because he understood the value of creativity and play associated with productivity. So in these spaces, that's what you see again and again and again is collaboration. Inside here, you also, and I'd love to see intellectual property lawyers here. There are technology transfer centers from universities. There's IT law. There are some black boxes. That is Boeing's venture effort there. Large facilities, transportation infrastructure, and most of all, culture. I don't know this guy. I was looking out for some quotes for this thing, and I ran into a Russian blogger at another conference of the Association of University Technology Managers. I ran into a gentleman who was South African, and he said to me, if you think the world's adoption, even partially of capitalism, shook the landscape, he said, wait until we get a hold of entrepreneurship. It's already happened. So when we're looking at this, these international relationships are so important, but they're a function of people. It's a function of culture. And you look at the base of any strong economic landscape, folks, it isn't the large employers. That is not what generates sustainability. It is the variability of the entrepreneurs. When the IT bubble collapsed and fell apart in Silicon Valley, do you know what they went after next? Anyone know what they really focused on? Personalizing the automobile. They decided to make smart vehicles and to make the car an experience like the iPhone. That's why you see all this happening with Tesla and Apple, because they're trying to also make that vehicle a part of your personal and cultural and social life. So what we look at is if we grow our own talent as an entire region from cola to cola and embrace the cross-state lines where we have wonderful infrastructure and relationships, we will attract those creatives. They'll recruit those industries, and that will foster those networks that will make living here in great shape. This happens everywhere. This is Reno, Nevada's new sort of makeover. What they're saying is we don't want to be known for the two things we're known for. One of them is gambling, and I won't mention the other. But on the left here, you'll see they have entrepreneurial events. I love ITEN Wired. We need to grow it. It is so wonderful to come from Panama City, Florida, and see this cluster here, but what I don't see is enough of Bay in Walton County, in Washington, and those other political partners and all that creativity that we have just a little bit east of me. We'll get there. The cultural events are essential. Look at their model. Startup funding, entrepreneurial resources, groups, spaces. This isn't happening just there. You ever been to Paris? When you look at the French culture saying to itself, hey, you know, we might learn something. You've got something to pay attention to. There are as well beginning to really actively target entrepreneurship as a core. It's not just Silicon Valley, it's Nashville reinventing itself from Music City to healthcare and IT. It's Chattanooga going from the worst national air. Walter Cronkite got on TV in 1971 and said, guess where the worst place you could possibly breathe is? Chattanooga, Tennessee. Have you gone there lately? It's beautiful. The aquarium's downtown. They've created this bohemian culture. It's a wonderful area for somebody young to move to. San Antonio, Texas, from a ditch to a riverwalk. Albany, New York, embracing nanotech. Austin, St. Louis, Pittsburgh. It is a culture of innovation that they are all after. At the center of much of this is a knowledge cluster. It's typically focused on tech. So that as you see these landscapes emerge in the technology clusters, we're right on top of it, folks. We are at what is called a cusp event. We're standing right on the portal. The guy that I talked to on the West Coast who was a venture capitalist, when I said I was from Panama City, he said, oh man, you guys won't cooperate. You don't talk to Walton County. You don't get Panama City. You talk to New Haven or Fort Walton, much less go over to Escambia County. You don't function as a region, and I wouldn't invest a penny. He did something later. He's the keynote speaker at that massive venture capital conference. He's a multi-billionaire. He had us nailed to a T. I'm not saying that to be harsh on us. I think we're making great progress. But we need to be aware of how we are perceived on a national scale. So the more we get ITEN event and these together, then we can start to develop the knowledge clusters that are known around the globe, from Munich, Helsinki, Ottawa, and beyond. So we're kind of at where Nashville was, at a tipping point. Nashville I guess it was over 20 years ago, they started something called Align Nashville. Where they started was the schools. They started in elementary. And they had 2 Fortune 500 CEOs that came in there and said, your school system is not producing, remember the blend game? You're not producing enough talent for us, so we're going to kick in there and help. You go up there today, it is probably the most impressive system I've seen nationwide. And there's Albany as an epicenter and a tech valley embracing that entrepreneurship. So you don't have to say this, but I want you just to think about where you are and think about what emphasis is placed on economic development and resources at a municipal level versus your county level and versus a region. This is the game we have to get very good at. Remember, we're headed in the right direction, but whether or not we want our children to stay here, that's what's going to tell the tale. So when you see these regions create themselves, they typically come up through formal and informal. Some of them are formed by governments or league function or the public approach. There's all different ways to define and make a region. Typically they're done politically. The states are divided into the counties, and here's Florida divided up. If you'll notice that Northwest region, we are 1.4 million people. We recently passed New York State, which I came from, as the 3rd most populous state in the United States. It is California, Texas, and Florida. We represent 1.4 million people in a population of 20 million. That itself represents a political and resource challenge. So we've got all this great infrastructure because happily, as Miami and Tampa and Jacksonville and Orlando choose the lesser of all evils, we wind up with great state representation. And we wind up with some influential money coming into the Panhandle. We are also known a bit as the Gulf Coast Aerospace Corridor. I love this initiative. I've been to a couple of these conferences that stretch from Mobile's success and Alabama's focus on that cluster into the supply chain that could be Panama City. If you go down to Indian River, they have renamed themselves from the Treasure Coast to the Research Coast. And they've drawn in millions of dollars of industry with that rebranding. Take a look at where you guys are. A wonderful name with Innovation Coast and the outreach from the travel times within that zone. But I come from the almost forgotten coast. That's right. I don't want to mess up with my little laser, but I'm just on that political geographic boundary where, well, we're not quite sure to do with you because we got to curve down and drive a little further and the I-10 spur doesn't drop close enough. What a gift you have with I-10 going right through here. It's phenomenal. We are actually the largest import of copper in the world, excuse me, United States, because Panama City was named Panama City because we used to ship the cotton from the southeast down to the Panama Canal. That was our namesake. But we still have these issues with these names. Who's been to 30A? We have a lot of people who likes 30A. I love 30A. It's a 30A feeling, right? How many of you have the bumper sticker? All right, we got one or two. Okay, good. But when you look at them, they're linked micro communities. I want you to remember this lesson of success, this umbrella of branding that they do, which is the 30A lifestyle, the 30A experience. They are drawing so much money into the beaches of South Walton, I can barely drive up 331 to get to Freeport. The growth there is phenomenal. The branding is brilliant. What's coming next is the West Bay sector. That, folks, is a 50 to 100-year plan, where they grid out the areas that are designed for the culture, those things where people can live, where they can work, where they can play. It's coming. The great thing is tying it all together. When we look at Florida's Great Northwest and we identify our economic cluster, what if we look at it this way? What if we say, hey, let's focus on our workforce talent, small business development, put the entrepreneurs in the middle, and get some growth development strategies. What you see there is an architecture rendering of the Advanced Technology Center at Gulf Coast State College. But look at what is in the middle of that model. We are more focused on the entrepreneurial culture and growing those entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs that grow local tend to stay local. They tend to invest and continue to be part of that community. So what do we put between our workforce talent and our economic development? That community of entrepreneurial ecosystem for business, industry, education, and government. You saw the results of some of that last night. I hope you saw Professor Garrett, and I hope you were able to get away from him. I love the guy, but it's a great conversation. And then the challenge is, okay, guys. He's so excited about his students and what they can do, and that kind of enthusiasm is what you want in your culture. So as you connect the workforce development to economic and business resources, but at the end, you guys, it's about culture. When I go to Milwaukee and I go to Gateway Technical College, their relationships with Harley Davidson and all the entrepreneurs that they have, when I look at Alignment Nashville and their career readiness, every student that walks the stage in the Nashville school system has one of two things. They either have college credit up to 12, 16 hours or an industry recognized certificate, every single one. So here's our little entrepreneurial ecosystem in Bay County. I love what you've got going. I've been to your incubators. We have a great relationship with the University of West Florida, Pensacola State College. What I'm saying is we're getting there. We're getting there. Remember our story. So the question is, when the bridge breaks, when the talent chain breaks, when there's some kind of challenge and we all have to band together, what is it that America does? We're so good at this. We always do the next great thing. I look forward to doing the next great thing as your partner. I look forward to this region growing. I look forward to ITEN growing, and thank you for listening.